The gunshot that killed Sarah Mitchell's husband echoed through the canyon for what felt like an eternity. But it was the silence that followed 6 weeks later, when she buried her newborn daughter, that truly shattered her world. Now, 8 months after that spring burial, Sarah stood behind the bar of the Golden Spur Saloon in Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, pouring whiskey for dusty cowboys and card players who never looked her in the eye long enough to see the grief she carried like a second skin. The year was 1883, and the town had seen its share of hardship, but Sarah's story was one that made even the hardest men turn away. She was 23 years old and felt ancient. The November wind rattled the windows as she wiped down the bar top, her hands moving in mechanical patterns she had perfected over the past months. The saloon owner, a gruff man named Chester who had taken pity on her when she had nothing left, let her keep the small room upstairs in exchange for her work. It was not much, but it kept her fed and gave her something to do besides remember. The door swung open, bringing in a gust of cold air and a tall cowboy she had never seen before. He had the look of a man who had spent too many nights under open sky, his face weathered but handsome in a rugged way, his eyes a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. He removed his hat as he approached the bar, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Whiskey, if you have it." Sarah poured without speaking, sliding the glass across the polished wood. He caught it with one hand, fingers calloused and scarred. He did not drink immediately, instead watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You look like you are carrying the weight of the world," he said quietly. The unexpected observation made her throat tighten. "That is none of your concern, mister. Name is Cole Brennan," he said, taking a slow sip. "And you are right, it is not my concern, but I have seen that look before in the mirror mostly." Despite herself, Sarah met his eyes. There was something there, a depth of understanding that made her defenses waver. "Sarah Mitchell," she heard herself say. "Pleased to meet you, Sarah Mitchell." He did not ask more, just nursed his drink and watched the card game happening in the corner. But his presence felt different from the other men who passed through. He did not leer or make crude jokes. He simply existed in the space, solid and calm. Over the next week, Cole became a regular fixture at the Golden Spur. He was working at the Patterson Ranch, he told her, breaking horses and helping with the cattle. Good work for a man who liked to keep moving, he said, but he was getting tired of running from place to place. Sarah found herself looking forward to his appearances, the way he always greeted her politely, the way he left generous coins on the bar, the way he sometimes shared stories about the places he had been without ever prying into her own past. On the 8th night, a drunk miner got aggressive, grabbing Sarah's wrist when she tried to collect his empty glass. "Come here, pretty widow woman," he slurred, yanking her toward him. Cole was out of his chair before Sarah could react, his hand clamping down on the miner's shoulder with enough force to make the man yelp. "Let her go," Cole said, his voice dangerously quiet. The miner released her, stumbling back. Chester appeared from the back room, and together they escorted the drunk out into the street. When Cole returned, Sarah was shaking, not from fear but from the sudden rush of feeling something again after months of numbness. "Thank you," she whispered. "No man should put his hands on a woman that way," Cole said simply. He hesitated, then added, "Your shift about done. Let me walk you upstairs. Make sure no one else bothers you tonight." It was a simple offer born of concern rather than expectation. Sarah nodded, untying her apron. Chester waved her off, and she led Cole up the narrow staircase to the small landing outside her room. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp. "I am fine now," she said, reaching for her door handle. "Sarah." His voice stopped her. "I know I have no right to ask, but what happened to you? What put that sorrow in your eyes?" The question, asked with such genuine care, broke something open inside her. She turned to face him, and suddenly the words were spilling out before she could stop them. "I lost my baby last spring," she said through tears that came without warning, her voice cracking on every syllable. I lost my husband too, shot down by outlaws, but it was my little girl, my Rose, who took the last piece of my heart when she died. She was only 3 days old. I could not save her. I tried everything, but she just slipped away. The sobs came hard then, months of suppressed grief erupting like a dam breaking. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed of falling apart in front of this near stranger but unable to stop. Strong arms encircled her, pulling her against a solid chest. The cowboy held her through the grief tonight, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped firmly around her waist, anchoring her to the world when she felt like she might float away on a tide of sorrow. I am so sorry, Cole murmured against her hair. I am so damn sorry, Sarah. She did not know how long they stood there in the dim hallway, her tears soaking into his shirt, his steady presence the only thing keeping her upright. When the storm finally passed, leaving her exhausted and hollow, she pulled back slightly, unable to meet his eyes. I should not have done that, she whispered. I barely know you. Sometimes strangers are easier to tell, he said gently, his hands still resting lightly on her arms. And for what it is worth, I know what it is like to lose someone. My younger sister died of fever when she was just 6 years old. I was supposed to be watching her, but I went off to play instead. By the time I got back, she was burning up. She was gone within 2 days. Sarah looked up at him then, seeing the old pain etched in the lines around his eyes. How old were you? 10, old enough to know better. He gave a sad smile. It has been 18 years and I still think about what I could have done differently. You were just a child. And you did everything you could for your daughter. Sometimes loss just happens, no matter how hard we fight against it. The simple absolution, spoken with such conviction, made fresh tears spill down Sarah's cheeks. Cole wiped them away with his thumbs, his touch infinitely gentle. You did not fail her, Sarah. You loved her. That is what matters. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forging in the shared understanding of grief. Sarah realized she was still standing within the circle of his arms and she should step back, should put proper distance between them, but she could not quite make herself move. Would you like to come in? She asked quietly. Just to talk, I have coffee. Cole studied her face, making sure she meant it, then nodded. I would like that. Her room was small but tidy, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a small table with 2 chairs, and a potbelly stove in the corner. She lit the lamp and busied herself with the coffee pot while Cole sat at the table, looking oddly right in the cramped space. When she finally sat across from him, 2 steaming cups between them, the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Tell me about her, Cole said. About Rose. No one had asked that before. Everyone in town avoided mentioning the baby, as if pretending she had never existed would somehow hurt less. But Sarah found she wanted to talk about her daughter, wanted to make her real to someone else. She had the softest dark hair, Sarah began, her voice steadier now. And when she opened her eyes, they were this deep blue, like twilight. The midwife said all babies have blue eyes at first, but I think hers would have stayed that way. She had the tiniest fingers, and when she wrapped them around mine, I felt like I could do anything, survive anything, as long as I had her. Cole listened without interrupting as Sarah talked about those 3 precious days, about how Rose had struggled to breathe from the beginning, how the doctor had shaken his head sadly and said sometimes babies were just too fragile for this world. She talked about her husband James, too, a good man who had been trying to protect their small homestead when the outlaws rode through looking for easy money. He never even got to meet his daughter, dying 2 weeks before she was born. I sold the homestead, Sarah continued, cradling her coffee cup. Could not bear to stay there with all those ghosts, came into town with nothing but the clothes I wore and the few dollars I got from the sale. Chester gave me this job and this room. Most days I just go through the motions. But some days, like today, it all comes crashing back and I wonder why I am still here when they are both gone. Because you have more living to do, Cole said firmly. Your story is not over, Sarah. It feels like it is, I know, After my sister died, I ran away from home at 14. Spent years drifting, punishing myself, taking every dangerous job I could find because some part of me thought I deserved to suffer. It took me a long time to understand that survival is not a betrayal of the people we have lost. How did you finally understand it? Met an old rancher up in Montana who had lost his wife and 2 sons to cholera. He told me that the best way to honor the dead is to live fully, to find joy again, to make their memory a blessing rather than a curse. He said grief never goes away completely, but it can transform into something softer, something that reminds us we were lucky enough to love someone that much. Cole reached across the table, covering her hand with his. I think your Rose would want you to be happy again someday. Sarah felt the warmth of his hand seeping into her skin, chasing away some of the perpetual cold that had settled in her bones. I do not know if I remember how to be happy. Then maybe you need to learn again, one small thing at a time. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. He was watching her with such kindness, such complete acceptance of her broken places that she felt something flutter in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps the shadow of possibility. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked. Because everyone deserves kindness, he said simply. And because I see something in you, Sarah Mitchell. Under all that pain, there is strength, there is beauty, there is a woman worth knowing. Heat rose in her cheeks. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as something other than a tragic figure. You do not even know me. Then let me get to know you. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. If you will allow it. Sarah knew she should be cautious. She had been shattered too recently to be thinking about anything resembling courtship. But something about Cole made her want to take that risk, to step toward life instead of remaining frozen in the moment of loss. I would like that, she whispered. Cole's smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger, less burdened. Good. Then how about tomorrow evening after your shift, you let me take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant? Nothing fancy, just a proper meal that you did not have to serve to someone else. That sounds lovely. He stood then, picking up his hat from where he had set it on the table. I should let you get some rest. But Sarah, thank you for telling me about Rose. Thank you for trusting me with that. She walked him to the door, feeling lighter than she had in months. When he turned to say goodnight, she acted on impulse, rising on her toes to press a soft kiss to his cheek. Thank you for listening, she said. Thank you for seeing me. His hand came up to cup her face, his eyes searching hers. I see you, he promised, and I am not going anywhere. After he left, Sarah sat on her bed in the lamplight, touching her fingers to her lips and thinking about the way Cole's arms had felt around her, the way his words had soothed the rawest edges of her pain. She thought about Rose, buried in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking town, and for the first time she did not feel like joining her daughter in the ground. She felt instead like maybe she could carry that love forward into whatever came next. The following evening, Sarah took extra care with her appearance, pinning up her honey-colored hair and wearing the one good dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that James had bought her for their first anniversary. She felt a pang of guilt at first, wondering if it was wrong to be excited about another man, but then she remembered what Cole had said about honoring the dead by living fully. James had been a kind man. He would want her to be happy. Cole arrived exactly when he said he would, cleaned up and handsome in a pressed shirt and vest. His eyes widened when he saw her. You look beautiful, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. The hotel restaurant was the nicest establishment in Silver Creek, with white tablecloths and real silverware. Sarah could not remember the last time she had eaten somewhere she was being served instead of serving others. They ordered steak and potatoes, and Cole insisted on dessert, apple pie with fresh cream. Over the meal, they talked about lighter things. Cole told her about the ornery mare he was training at the Patterson Ranch, how she had thrown him twice before he finally earned her trust. Sarah shared stories about the eccentric regulars at the Golden Spur, Like old Pete, who claimed to have struck gold in California back in '49 and drunk it all away. Or Miss Loretta, who dealt cards better than any man and took no nonsense from anyone. "You have a nice laugh," Cole observed as she giggled over his description of Chester trying to break up a fight between two cowboys who turned out to be brothers just rough housing. "I am glad to hear it." "I have not laughed much lately," Sarah admitted. "It feels strange, but good." "That is the thing about healing," Cole said, his expression serious now. "It happens in fits and starts. Some days you will feel okay, and then something will hit you and you will be right back in the thick of grief. But slowly, the okay days start to outnumber the bad ones." "Is that how it was for you?" he nodded. "Still is sometimes. I will hear a little girl laugh or see one playing with her brother and I will think of Lily. Wonder what she would have been like grown up, but now I can smile at the memories instead of just feeling the guilt." "Lily," Sarah repeated softly. "That is a pretty name. She was a pretty kid, wild as anything, could climb a tree faster than me." His smile was bittersweet. "I like to think she would have been a force of nature if she had lived. Maybe a pioneer woman, one of those doctors or lawyers breaking all the rules." "I think Rose would have been strong too," Sarah said. "She fought so hard to stay, even though her little lungs could not manage it. I used to hold her against my chest and will my own breath into her." Cole reached across the table, taking her hand again. It was becoming a familiar gesture, one that grounded her. She knew she was loved. That is more than a lot of people get in a whole lifetime. They lingered over coffee after the pie was gone, neither quite ready for the evening to end. When they finally left the restaurant, the night was crisp and clear, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Cole offered his arm and Sarah took it, enjoying the solid feel of him beside her as they walked slowly back toward the saloon. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they paused outside the entrance. "Why Silver Creek? You said you like to keep moving. What brought you here? Honestly, I do not know. I was heading south from Colorado, no particular destination in mind, and something just made me stop here. Now I am thinking maybe it was fate." He turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe I was meant to meet you." "I do not believe in fate," Sarah whispered, but even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. Maybe not fate then, maybe just good luck. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Can I see you again, tomorrow? I would like that." "Good." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well, Sarah." She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the distance, until he disappeared around the corner toward the boarding house where he was staying. Then she went upstairs to her room, changed into her nightgown, and lay in bed thinking about blue eyes and gentle hands and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to be happy again. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Cole would come to the saloon every evening, have a drink or two while Sarah worked, then walk her upstairs. Sometimes they would sit in her room and talk until late, sharing stories and dreams. Other times he would take her out, showing her places around Silver Creek she had never bothered to explore in her grief. He took her riding on a gentle mare from the ranch, letting her feel the freedom of open land and wind in her hair. He brought her wildflowers that made her room smell like spring. He kissed her, finally, on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after they met, a slow, sweet kiss that tasted like promise. "I am falling in love with you," he confessed one night in early December, his arms around her as they sat on her bed, her back against his chest. "I know it is fast, and I know you might not be ready to hear it, but I needed you to know." Sarah turned in his embrace, studying his face in the lamplight. She saw honesty there and vulnerability and a hope that made her heart ache. "I am falling in love with you too," she admitted, "and it terrifies me. What if I lose you too? What if this is all ripped away?" "You might," Cole said seriously. "That is the risk of loving anyone, but Sarah, is not better to have this, even if it does not last forever, than to shut yourself away and never feel anything again." She thought about that, about the way he had brought color back into her gray world, about how she now woke up looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, it is better." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Sarah let herself fall into him, into the terrifying and exhilarating possibility of new love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "I know it is soon, but I am not a man who does things halfway. I want to build a life with you, Sarah. I want to give you a home and a future. I want to make you happy." Sarah's breath caught. "Cole, you do not have to answer now," he said quickly. "Think about it, but know that I am serious. I want you to be my wife." She kissed him instead of answering, pouring everything she felt into that kiss, gratitude and fear and love and hope all tangled together. When she pulled back, she saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. "Ask me again at Christmas," she whispered. "If you still feel the same way then, ask me again." "I will still feel the same way," he promised. The days leading up to Christmas were some of the happiest Sarah had experienced since before James died. Cole was true to his word, steady and patient, courting her properly while also making it clear that his intentions were serious. He spoke to Chester about better wages for Sarah, and to his boss at the Patterson Ranch about the possibility of permanent work. He took her to the Sunday church services she had been avoiding, sitting beside her and holding her hand through the hymns. He visited Rose's grave with her, standing quietly as Sarah laid wildflowers on the small headstone and whispered words of love to the daughter who would never grow up. "I am not trying to replace them," Cole said as they walked back down the hill. "Your husband or your baby, I know I never could." "I know," Sarah assured him. "And I would not want you to try. What we have is different. It does not erase what came before, it just is." On Christmas Eve, Chester gave Sarah the evening off, a rare kindness that made her suspect Cole had something to do with it. He picked her up early, bundled in a thick coat against the cold, and led her out of town on horseback. She was getting more confident in the saddle, trusting the gentle mare and trusting Cole to keep her safe. He took her to a spot a few miles outside Silver Creek where someone, clearly him, had set up a small camp. There was a fire burning cheerfully, blankets spread on the ground, and a basket of food. "You did all this?" Sarah asked, delighted. "Wanted to give us a proper Christmas," Cole said, helping her down from the horse. "Just the two of us under the stars." They ate roasted chicken and fresh bread, drank cider that was still warm from the flask Cole had packed it in, and talked about everything and nothing. When the food was gone, Cole pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I made you something," he said, suddenly shy. "It is not much." Sarah unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small wooden box, the lid carved with delicate roses. "Cole," she breathed, "this is beautiful. I thought you could keep special things in it, memories of Rose or anything else you want to hold close." He opened the lid, showing her that he had already placed something inside, a pressed wildflower, the same type he had brought her when they first started courting. "Every flower I give you, you can save one. That way you will always have something growing, even in winter." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." "So, is that a yes?" Cole asked, pulling a small ring from his vest pocket. It was simple silver with a single small stone, probably all he could afford on a ranch hand's wages, but to Sarah it was the most precious thing in the world. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you, Cole Brennan." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly while the fire crackled beside them and the stars wheeled overhead. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, Sarah felt something she had thought she would never feel again, pure, uncomplicated joy. "When?" she asked. "When do you want to get married? Tomorrow," Cole said immediately. "Or the next day, as soon as possible." "I have waited 31 years to find you, Sarah. I do not want to wait any longer than I have to." "New Year's Day," Sarah decided. Let us start the new year as husband and wife. Perfect. They stayed by the fire until late, wrapped in blankets and each other, making plans for their future. Cole had enough saved to put a down payment on a small piece of land, and with Sarah's savings from her work at the saloon, they could build a modest house. He would continue working with horses, maybe start his own breeding operation eventually. She could tend a garden, maybe take in sewing or laundry to contribute. It would be a simple life, but it would be theirs. "I want children," Sarah said quietly, voicing the hope she had barely let herself acknowledge. "I know it is risky, I know I might lose another baby, but I want to try." "Is that foolish?" "It is not foolish," Cole said firmly. "It is brave, and whatever happens, we will face it together. If we are blessed with children, wonderful. If not, we will still have each other." "What if I am broken?" The fear spilled out before she could stop it. "What if there is something wrong with me, and that is why Rose died?" Cole turned her to face him, his hands cradling her face. "You are not broken. The doctor said Rose had weak lungs, that it was nothing you did or did not do. Sometimes these things just happen, Sarah. But we will not live in fear of what might go wrong. We will hope for what could go right." She kissed him for that, for his optimism and his strength and his unwavering belief in their future. When he finally took her back to town, both of them were tired and cold but happier than either had been in years. The next week was a flurry of preparation. Sarah gave her notice to Chester, who grumbled but admitted he was happy for her. Miss Loretta helped her sew a simple white dress for the ceremony. Cole filed the papers for the land purchase and started making lists of materials they would need for the house. On New Year's Eve, they stood in the small church with Chester and Loretta as witnesses, and Reverend Thomas married them as the clock struck midnight, welcoming 1884 with vows of love and fidelity. "I, Cole Brennan, take you, Sarah Mitchell, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Cole said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and health, for all the days of my life. I promise to honor the love you carry for those you have lost, and to build new love with you that will last forever." Sarah's vows were equally heartfelt. "I, Sarah Brennan," she said, using her new name for the first time, "take you, Cole, to be my husband. I promise to love you with my whole heart, to support your dreams, and to build a life with you filled with hope and happiness. Thank you for seeing me when I was lost, and for leading me back into the light." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Cole kissed her, Sarah felt Rose's presence like a blessing, as if her daughter was giving her permission to move forward, to embrace this new chapter. She sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the 3 days she had been given with her baby, and a prayer of hope for the years stretching ahead with her husband. Cole had arranged for them to spend their wedding night in the best room at the hotel, a luxury they could barely afford but one he insisted on. As he carried her over the threshold, Sarah laughed, feeling young and giddy in a way she had not felt since before the world turned dark. "Hello, Mrs. Brennan," Cole said, setting her down gently. "Hello, Mr. Brennan," she replied, reaching up to unknot his tie. Their coming together was tender and passionate, a celebration of survival and new beginnings. Cole was patient with her nerves, reverent in his touch, making her feel cherished and desired. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Sarah traced the scars on his chest, marks from years of hard living, and thought about how they were both scarred people who had found each other in the darkness. "I love you," she whispered into the quiet. "I love you too," Cole replied, kissing the top of her head. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." They spent the winter months living in a small rented cabin while Cole worked on building their house. Sarah kept herself busy setting up their temporary home, cooking meals for her husband, and helping where she could with the construction. On warmer days, she would ride out to the building site and watch Cole and the crew he had hired frame the walls and raise the roof. It was going to be a small house, just 4 rooms, but it was going to be theirs. In March, exactly a year after Rose's death, Sarah woke feeling ill. At first she thought she had caught a stomach bug, but when the nausea continued for several days, always worse in the morning, she allowed herself to hope. Miss Loretta, who had become a good friend, confirmed her suspicion. "You are with child, honey," Loretta said, a knowing smile on her painted face. "Congratulations." Sarah was terrified to tell Cole, afraid of jinxing it, afraid of his reaction, afraid of everything that could go wrong. But when he came home that evening, covered in sawdust and tired but happy, she could not keep it in. "I am pregnant," she blurted out before he had even removed his coat. Cole froze, his eyes widening. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be this early." "Loretta thinks I am about 6 weeks along." He crossed to her in 2 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "This is wonderful," he said fiercely. "This is the best news." "You are not worried?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "Of course I am worried," Cole admitted, "but I am also overjoyed." "We are going to have a baby, Sarah, our baby." She clung to him, letting his certainty bolster her own wavering courage. "I am scared. I know I am too, but we are going to get through this together, and in November we are going to meet our son or daughter." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah was sick for months, unable to keep much food down, and she worried constantly that something was wrong. Cole hired a midwife from the next town over, an experienced woman named Mrs. Callahan who had delivered hundreds of babies. She examined Sarah regularly and pronounced everything normal, but Sarah could not shake her fear. "Your body knows what to do," Mrs. Callahan assured her in her no-nonsense way. "First babies are hard and you have been through trauma, but this baby is strong, I can feel it." They moved into the new house in June, and Sarah found comfort in nesting, making their home perfect for the arrival of their child. She sewed blankets and tiny gowns, prepared the small nursery, and tried to believe that this time would be different. Cole was endlessly patient with her moods and fears, holding her when she cried, reassuring her when panic set in. In late October, when the leaves were turning gold and the air carried the first hint of winter, Sarah went into labor. It lasted 18 agonizing hours, and there were moments when she was certain history was repeating itself, that she was going to lose another baby. But Cole never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You are the strongest woman I know. Just a little more, Sarah, just a little more." When the baby finally came, screaming lustily and red-faced with fury at being born, Sarah burst into tears. "Is it breathing?" she demanded. "Are the lungs clear?" "Strong as a bull, Mrs. Callahan announced, laying the baby on Sarah's chest. "You have a healthy baby boy, Mrs. Brennan." Sarah stared down at her son, hardly daring to believe he was real. He had a shock of dark hair like Cole and was waving his tiny fists angrily. His cry was loud and strong, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Hello, my beautiful boy." Cole was crying too, his face pressed against Sarah's shoulder as he stared at his son in wonder. "We did it," he said hoarsely. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked. They had discussed names, but somehow none of them had felt right. Now, looking at this tiny miracle, Sarah knew exactly what his name should be. "James," she said. "James Cole Brennan, for your father and for you." Cole's eyes widened, then he nodded, emotion rendering him speechless. He leaned down and kissed Sarah gently. "Thank you," he managed. "Thank you for him. Thank you for everything." Little James thrived from the beginning. He was a hungry, noisy baby who demanded attention and gave his love generously in return. Sarah hardly slept those first weeks, constantly checking to make sure he was breathing, but as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, she began to relax. This baby was strong. This baby was going to survive. When James was 2 months old, on a cold January day, Sarah bundled him warmly and asked Cole to take them to the cemetery. It was time to introduce her son to his sister. They stood at Rose's small grave, and Sarah told her daughter about her little brother. "You would have loved him," she said softly, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You would have been the best big sister. I am sorry you did not get to stay with us, my sweet Rose, but I promise I will never forget you. I will tell James all about you when he is old enough to understand. You will always be part of this family." Cole's arm was solid around her waist, James sleeping peacefully in his arms. "She knows," he said quietly. "Wherever she is, she knows she is loved." As they walked back to the wagon, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The grief would never fully go away, she understood that now. Rose would always be a tender place in her heart. But she had survived the worst pain imaginable, and on the other side, she had found love and built a new family. She had learned that the heart is capable of holding both sorrow and joy, loss and hope, endings and beginnings all at once. Over the next few years, their family grew. Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Lily Grace when James was 2, a tribute to Cole's lost sister and a name that felt like blessing. Lily was as wild and joyful as her Uncle Cole described his sister being, a little girl who feared nothing and approached life with absolute confidence. When James was 4 and Lily was 2, Sarah delivered twins, 2 boys they named Benjamin and Lucas, who looked so alike that only their parents could tell them apart. The house that had seemed adequate when they built, it became cramped and chaotic, filled with the noise and mess of 4 young children. Cole expanded it, adding rooms and a proper porch where Sarah could sit in the evenings and watch her children play. He built up his horse breeding operation until it was one of the most respected in the territory, and Sarah sold her preserves and baked goods at the general store, contributing to their growing prosperity. On spring evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Sarah and Cole would sit on that porch and watch the sun set over the land they had built their life on. Sarah would think about the broken woman she had been when they met, shattered by loss and unable to see a future. She would think about Cole, equally broken in his own way, carrying his own scars. Together they had found healing, not by forgetting the people they had lost, but by honoring them with the fullness of the life they built. Do you ever regret it? Cole asked one such evening, his arm around her shoulders. "Marrying a drifter cowboy who convinced you to take a chance, not for a single second," Sarah said, leaning into his warmth. "You saved my life, Cole Brennan." "No," he corrected gently, "we saved each other." It was true. They had been 2 wounded souls who found each other in the darkness and chose to walk toward the light together. The grief never fully disappeared. There were still days when Sarah would see a little girl with dark hair and think of Rose, days when Cole would watch James and his brothers play and remember Lily. But the pain had transformed, just as the old rancher in Montana had promised it would, into something softer. A reminder that they had loved, that they had lost, and that they had survived to love again. As Sarah sat on her porch, listening to the sounds of her sleeping children through the open window and feeling the solid presence of her husband beside her, she sent up a prayer of gratitude. For the baby she had lost, who had taught her the depth of a mother's love. For the cowboy who had held her through her grief and shown her how to live again. For the children who filled her days with noise and joy and endless demands. For this life, hard and beautiful and unexpected, that she had built from the ashes of her sorrow. The Arizona sky was turning purple and gold, stars beginning to appear in the deepening twilight. Cole's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture as familiar now as breathing. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and Sarah heard the horses answering from the barn Cole had built behind the house. "I am going to check on the children one more time before we turn in," Sarah said, rising from her chair. "I will come with you," Cole said, standing and stretching. "I never get tired of watching them sleep." They moved through the house quietly, checking each room. James, now 7, was sprawled across his bed, one arm dangling off the side, the book he had been reading fallen to the floor. Cole picked it up and set it on the nightstand, pulling the blanket over his eldest son. In the next room, Lily was curled into a tight ball, her dark curls spread across the pillow. looking like an angel despite the trouble she had caused that day climbing a tree she had no business climbing. The twins were in the room they shared, Ben snoring softly and Luke sleeping silent and still. Sarah stood in the doorway of the nursery, even though it was empty now, the cradle packed away in the attic. She thought about Rose, who should have been 8 years old now, probably bossy and protective of her younger siblings. The ache was still there, but it no longer threatened to swallow her whole. "Do you think we will have more?" Cole asked softly, standing behind her and resting his chin on top of her head. "I do not know," Sarah admitted. 4 children is already more than I dreamed possible, but if it happens, we will welcome another blessing. They went to their own room finally, changing into night clothes and climbing into the bed they had shared for nearly 6 years. Cole pulled Sarah close, her back against his chest, his arm draped over her waist. This position had become their custom, the way they always slept, sheltered in each other. "Sarah," Cole's voice was drowsy in the darkness. "Yes. Thank you for saying yes. That night I proposed when you could have turned me away, but you chose to take a chance instead. Thank you for building this life with me." Sarah turned in his arms so she could see his face in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. She traced the lines around his eyes, the sharp plane of his jaw, the mouth that smiled so readily now. "You gave me back my life," she said simply. "You saw me at my absolute worst, broken and drowning in grief, and you did not turn away. You held me through it. You showed me I could survive, that I could love again. So thank you, Cole. Thank you for being exactly who you are." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 6 years of shared history and the promise of decades more to come. When they broke apart, both settling back into their sleeping position, Sarah felt that deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged. She thought about that November night in 1883 when she had told a near stranger about losing her baby, how she had broken down in the dim hallway of the saloon, and how that cowboy had held her through her grief. She thought about how that single act of compassion had been the beginning of everything, the crack in the wall she had built around her heart that eventually let the light back in. Life was not perfect. There were hard days when the crops did not do well, or when one of the children got sick and fear gripped her heart, or when she and Cole argued about money or discipline, or a dozen other small things that couples disagreed about. But underneath all of it was the solid foundation of their love, built on shared pain and mutual understanding, on the conscious choice they made every day to choose each other. In the morning, Sarah would wake to the sound of James calling for breakfast and Lily shrieking about something the twins had done. She would make pancakes and clean up spills and referee arguments, and do the 1,000 small tasks that made up a mother's day. Cole would head out to the barns to tend the horses, would come in for lunch with hay in his hair, would play with the children before supper and make them shriek with laughter. It would be an ordinary day, unremarkable in every way except for the fact that it was theirs, this life they had built from loss and pain and hope. But tonight, in the quiet darkness with her husband steady breathing in her ear and her children safe in their beds, Sarah simply felt grateful. For the baby she had lost and the babies she had been blessed to keep. For the husband who had loved her back to life. For the home they had made together. For second chances and new beginnings and the resilient human heart that could break and somehow still find the courage to love again. She closed her eyes, Cole's arm tightening slightly around her in sleep, and sent one last thought to her daughter. "Thank you, Rose," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for teaching me how to love with my whole heart. I am using that gift every day." As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah dreamed of spring, of wildflowers blooming on a hillside, of a little girl with dark hair running through a meadow, laughing. When she woke in the morning, she would remember only fragments of the dream, but she would carry the feeling of it with her throughout the day, a sense of peace and rightness with the world. The years would continue to unfold, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. Cole's horse operation would eventually become successful enough that they could hire help and take some of the pressure off. The children would grow, each developing their own distinct personalities and dreams. James would prove to have his mother's gentle heart and would become a teacher. Lily would be as wild as predicted, eventually marrying a cowboy and running her own ranch. The twins would be inseparable, going into business together running a feed store in the growing town of Silver Creek. Sarah and Cole would grow old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving more slowly, but their love only deepening with time. They would bury Sarah's parents, and eventually Cole's father would celebrate births of grandchildren, would navigate the changing world as Arizona moved from territory to state in 1912. Through it all, they would remain each other's anchor, the solid ground in a shifting world. But all of that was yet to come. For now, in the spring of 1890, Sarah Brennan was simply a woman blessed with a good husband, healthy children, and a hard-won happiness. She had learned that grief could coexist with joy, that loss did not have to mean the end of everything, that the human heart was far more resilient than she had ever imagined. She had lost her baby last spring, years ago now, and that sorrow would always be part of her story. But it was not the end of her story. The cowboy who had held her through her grief that night had shown her that there could be chapters beyond tragedy, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil, that endings could transform into beginnings if you were brave enough to keep living. And Sarah had been brave. She had chosen life over despair, hope over fear, love over loneliness. She had taken the cowboy's hand when he offered it and built something beautiful from the broken pieces. That was the real miracle, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her. Not that the pain had gone away, but that she had survived it and found joy on the other side. In the room down the hall, little Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about horses. In the room beyond, one of the twins started crying from a bad dream, and Sarah heard James's older brother voice soothing him back to sleep. Her children, her miracles, her proof that life continued even after the worst losses. Cole's arm tightened around her waist, and he murmured her name in his sleep. Her husband, her partner, her salvation, and she hoped she his. They had saved each other, two broken people who had somehow made each other whole. As the moon tracked across the Arizona sky and the house settled into deep night silence, Sarah held close the truth she had learned through so much pain. That the heart that has known the deepest sorrow is also capable of the deepest joy. That loss makes room for new love. And that sometimes, on a cold November night when you think you have nothing left to give, a stranger can walk into your life and change everything. She had told a cowboy about losing her baby, had cried in the arms of a man she barely knew, and he had held her through the grief. That single act of compassion had been the beginning of her healing, the first step on a long journey back to happiness. She would be forever grateful to the man who had not looked away from her pain, who had seen her at her worst and chosen to stay, who had loved her back to life with patience and tenderness and unwavering faith in their future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new ordinary moments that made up a life. But tonight, Sarah Brennan slept peacefully in her husband's arms, surrounded by her children, secure in the knowledge that she had survived the worst and come out stronger. She had learned to carry her grief as a companion rather than a burden, to honor what she had lost while embracing what she had found. And in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Silver Creek, a little headstone stood guard over a grave that was never forgotten. The name Rose Amelia Mitchell carved into the stone, forever 3 days old, forever loved. The wildflowers Sarah planted there every spring were beginning to come up, pushing through the last of the winter frost, reaching toward the sun. Life continuing as it always did, beautiful and heartbreaking and impossibly precious, the end.